Mysterious disappearances are always confusing. Sometimes people just up and vanish. Often, personal problems and life's pressures prove to be too much and they choose to walk away. Other times, it's strange locations that are areas that seem to be a magnet for the missing, famously places like the Bermuda Triangle and people like the missing 411. Often, the explanations offered for these vanishings are tragic, but not anything that would need us to think outside of the box. Accidents, suicides, and runaways. This being said, there has been a number of disappearances that are not so easily explained. This because whole groups of people have just vanished into thin air, leaving little to no trace to what happened to them. In this two-part video, I will look at the vanishing of a large group of soldiers and see if we can find any answers. So let's take a look. Welcome to IF, videos on history, mystery, and the strange. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a video again. War is chaos, death, destruction, and terror. All of this is part of any battle. Battles and the stories of war have a tendency to grow into legend and create many mysteries, along with amazing stories. One such story begins in 1918. World War I had just finished and the War Graves Commission searched the battlefields of Gallipoli for the remains of 36,000 Commonwealth servicemen who had perished during the campaign. Of these brave souls, 13,000 laid in unidentified graves and 14,000 bodies were never recovered. Such a waste of life, but where is the mystery? The Gallipoli campaign took place on the Gallipoli Peninsula of the Ottoman Empire from the 25th of April 1915 until 9th of January 1916. The Allied powers of Britain and France had the objective of launching a naval and amphibious assault against the Turks in an attempt to capture and secure the Dardanelles, an area which was of great strategic importance as it connects the Mediterranean with the Black Sea, serving as an essential sea route for the Russians, allies of the Turks and Germans. An ill-conceived plan was to push through and forcefully take the city of Constantinople, the Ottoman Empire's capital. This would in effect remove the Turks from the war. Fighting this bloody campaign were the men of the Sandringhams, a military unit that had been created in 1908 by King Edward, comprising of men whom had been recruited from the staff of the Royal Sandringham estate. To create a larger force, these men were rolled into the 5th Territorial Battalion of the Royal Norfolk Regiment, or the Norfolks as they became known, the Norfolks in turn being given the title of the Vanished Battalion. So just how did they become known by this name? On the 12th of August 1915, the battalion was seen by men from other units marching off into battle against the Turks at Suvla Bay. They were never seen again. The Dardanelles campaign ended on December 1915 and all of the British and Commonwealth troops that survived were evacuated. Command made the assumption that any men who were missing had been killed or captured by Turkish forces and were held as prisoners of war. The British wanted to account for these disappearances of their men and asked the Turkish government if they had taken men prisoners, but the Turkish government denied having any knowledge of the Vanish Battalion. The British continued to demand the return of their fallen soldiers, but again the Turks adamantly denied having them and indeed declared that they had never even heard of the Norfolks. Some years later, the War Graves Commission searched for the war dead on the battlefields of Gallipoli. They had some success, recovering 14,000 of the 36,000 Commonwealth soldiers who had sacrificed themselves in this bloody campaign. 13,000 were found in unmarked graves. It was one of these graves that a Reverend Charles Pierpont Edwards uncovered a Norfolk's regimental cap badge along with 180 bodies scattered about and around a farmhouse which was surrounded by a wooded area in which the men were last seen. A further 122 of the bodies were found to have shoulder badges that identified them as members of the Norfolks, and one was even identified by his shoulder flashes as Lieutenant Colonel Beauchamp. For many, this was definitive proof that the regiment had been captured and killed, but as the years continued to pass, the case of the Vanish battalion would get stranger and stranger. This all begins with the then British Army officer Sir Ian Hamilton. The man was one of the chief commanders overseeing the Gallipoli campaign. He wrote, "In the course of the fight, there happened a very mysterious thing. The flying company of enlisted men from the King Sandringham estate charged into a forest and were lost to sight and sound." He then added the ominous words, "Nothing more was ever seen or heard of any of them." This turned the incident from a wartime tale of tragedy to an eerie battlefield mystery. A survivor, Sidney Pooley, disputed this story. He would go on to say, "I did not see any wood into which the officers and men could have disappeared. I know absolutely nothing about how the officers and the men disappeared. I heard no news about them charging into a wood until I came home." We also have the account of Reverend Pierpont Edwards, who discovered the bodies. He wrote, "The whole thing quite bears out the original theory that they did not go very far on, but got mopped up one by one, all except those who got into the farm. However, it has been said that Edwards privately told the soldiers had all been shot in the head, executions carried out by unknown people. Arthur Webber, another survivor, said he had heard his fellow soldiers were being ruthlessly rounded up and slaughtered by the Ottoman Empire. So it would seem these men were the unfortunate victims of wartime brutality. Well, not so fast. This is where the story has its strange twist. The case would become the topic of debate when, in April 1965, New Zealand World War I veteran Frederick Rickard, along with two of his brothers in arms, gave their story of what happened to the men of the Norfolk Regiment. Rickard told the tale that they had been sappers with the New Zealand Expeditionary Force, and the men had been operating in the area near a Turkish position known as Hill 60. This location was not far from the place the lost Norfolk Regiment had been fighting. The veteran claimed they noticed between 6 and 8 odd greyish, loaf-shaped clouds hovering over the battlefield. These strange clouds were said to be completely still, even when there were high winds blowing at the time. Below the clouds, or let's just say it, UFOs, was another, even larger and denser looking cloud-like object that was estimated as being around 800 feet in length and around 200 feet in height. The massive cloud, UFO, according to the men, was hovering over a dry creek bed. This was just as the Norfolk Regiment approached. The battalion did not stop marching. They walked directly into what was above the creek bed. Rickard claimed that it was at this point that the cloud slowly began to rise upwards to join the other strange clouds, the soldiers seemingly disappearing with it. This account of the British soldiers' disappearance was first published in the September-October edition of the New Zealand UFO magazine Space View back in 1965. The story told by the man and his fellow servicemen was corroborated in 1966. This when another New Zealand veteran, a one Gerald Wild, told the UFO publication that although he had not seen the what could be classified as an abduction directly, he had heard the many stories told by soldiers. These stories telling that the Norfolk Regiment had vanished into a cloud which was straddling the ground and were never to be seen again. This legend went against all of the official conclusions of what had happened to the men. It became a story UFO enthusiasts would regularly reference when discussing abduction theory, a missing persons case that would suggest alien abduction as the cause for many missing people. This sinister tale of a cloud-shaped UFO whisking away a whole regiment of men in the middle of a battle grew and grew, something about it capturing people's imaginations. It gained such popularity amongst the general public that the British Ministry of Defence and Imperial War Museum were constantly bombarded with letters requesting that they release any top-secret files that they have on the alien abduction and subsequent cover-up. So we are left asking, what really happened to the Norfolks? Did they die on that battlefield? Or were they abducted by extraterrestrials? The veracity of this story has been questioned. The story is said to be full of inconsistencies and inaccuracies, wrong dates, and even wrong battalion numbers. Rickard claimed that the incident happened on August 28, 1915, when in actuality it had been carried out on August 12th. He also claimed it was a quarter of the battalion that had vanished, when actually the 1st and 4th were a sister battalion held in reserve, had been the 1st and 5th battalion that had charged into battle and vanished. An important fact is that we have the clergyman Charles Pierpont Edwards who discovered the field of bodies in 1918. This finding suggesting that a war crime was the reason for the disappearance rather than an alien presence. Also, the Allied commander in charge of the Gallipoli campaign, Sir Ian Hamilton, also made efforts to dress up the massacre as something more mysterious and unexplained. This to cover his handling of a series of botched missions, mishaps, and poor planning. The officer not wanting to risk his reputation by admitting that his poor leadership and foresight had led to the pointless slaughter of so many men. I have a theory that everyone is actually correct to some extent. Maybe the cloud that is thought to be a UFO was actually smoke bombs. These smoke bombs used to cover an assault on the Norfolks by Turkish troops. The operation being a success and the Turks then being left with a large group of prisoners. Not knowing what to do with the men, the heinous order of execution was handed down. The cover-up after the event was not to hide the presence of an alien craft, but to cover for the surviving Turkish commanders who would have undoubtedly been handed a death sentence for their crimes post-war. Nevertheless, the idea of a brave battalion valiantly charging into battle and then mysteriously vanishing to never be heard from again is a compelling and powerful tale that captures the imagination. And if this event is not strange enough, how about weird cases of whole towns that disappear, leaving little to no trace? More on that in part 2. What do you think happened to these people? Are they victims of the supernatural? Were they abducted by extraterrestrials? Or was their disappearance down to nefarious government agencies and shady cover-ups? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And to make sure you don't miss part 2, please hit that red button, like and share. You can catch the latest by searching We Are If. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.